Hey guys, I have a very exciting video for today on data storytelling. I like to call it the formula for success. I go through the three pillars: visualization, narrative, and context, to really show you how to apply this formula to when you present your dashboard. And I actually created a world analysis dashboard just to show you how I would apply this formula so you can convey your analysis in a way that key stakeholders can understand, and being able to tell the story in a way that everyone can easily absorb. So I actually did a post on this a while ago on my blog, which actually will be in the description below. But essentially I went through and did a detailed analysis, just writing out and gave some examples. So if you have some time, it'd be cool if you can check that out. The next post I'd like to do is on dashboard design thinking, which I'll do very similar, where I'm actually presenting this all in Tableau right now. So that's something I'd like to do in the future, so you expect for that video and that post to come in the coming weeks here. So I put together this world analysis dashboard. It's actually data from the World Bank and even a sample data set within Tableau. So let's say a stakeholder comes to you and says, hey, I want to be able to see data throughout the world and see by population ranking, the fastest growing countries, which countries are living the longest, and which ones are spending the most on healthcare. So with that in mind, how would you go about creating a visualization? So it's not something that you just start plotting on the dashboard right away and start developing. You need to apply dashboard principles and dashboard designs, which makes it a whole lot easier beforehand, before you just start plotting everything and then presenting it. So for me, I personally like to have at the top my KPIs as well as icons. I like to keep that same look and feel as a website, similar to what we're all used to seeing. So the whole science behind data visualization is the users will typically have their eyes go from the top left and read from left to right, and we'll have labeling and everything segmented off. So in this case, I have world population metrics, and I'll have my population ranking starting here from the left, which I closely align to total population. So it's like subtle details like that, which could potentially make a big difference. So people start getting familiar with population rankings associated with, right underneath total population. So now we have a little bit of, cohesiveness. So then we move from the total populations to the trend of the world population, as well as average birth rate, and very subtle, right? We have average birth rate up here as well. And then we move to countries by birth rate, the fastest growing countries, and we have a heat map. And we see here in Central Africa, a lot of these countries here are the fastest growing. So very cohesive, right, and very fluid. So it's all related to population metrics, all flowing through. And now we get down to the bottom, and I like to continue to use icons wherever applicable. So down here we see that there's a lot of health indicators. We have the health indicator charts down here. So we see, I have a quadrant here based on which countries are spending the most, which ones are living the longest, which ones are living the least and spending the most. So this is a nice quadrant that helps break that all down. So this is very important to lay out your visualizations in a way that is very fluid and cohesive, and it takes time to go through and do the whole dashboard design of what your visual is going to be. So take some time and really go through that, because that's a very important component of the formula. So now we come down to the last two pillars in the formula: narrative and context. So narrative is the way we really need to convey the data to our audience, to our stakeholders. And context is being able to provide the background as to why the data is the way it is. So let's just take a couple examples. So if we look at population trend, right? So something may be a little more scrutiny to this, because we see that population is increasing and average birth rate is decreasing. Almost seems very contrary, right? You would think population would be decreasing. So I'm not even a subject matter expert on this, but was just doing some Google and analysis on this. So the average birth rate is decreasing due to the fact that women are having babies later in life, so in their early to mid 30s, versus 50 years ago, where they were having it in their 20s, something like that. And we see that population is still increasing, and the reason for that is there's actually a lag between the time average birth rate starts to decrease and population starts to decrease. There's a lag between when the population will start dropping. So that's why we see it still trending up. So if we give it several more years, eventually we'll start seeing start to trend down. I actually think it takes more than several years. It takes quite a while from when I was doing some research. And I actually put some tooltips in here in case someone was to come in here and say I'm not able to actually present this. They can actually do the analysis and just read it over and see why. And I provide a source in case they want to see some additional detail. So I do that very similarly across the board here, even with we look at fastest growing countries, right? So we see that Central Africa is the fastest growing countries based on the heat map. And like I said, not a subject matter expert, but I'm able to explain after doing some research. We see the reason why they're the fastest growing countries here in Central Africa is due to the economic conditions. I think it's more stifled economic conditions where the economy is not really growing. And for those reasons and those factors, they're actually having more babies there. So not an expert on it, but just through my analysis, I was able to do that, understand why. And when we look at healthcare, right? The use case was how can we see countries living the longest? How are they spending their healthcare, and countries that are spending the most on healthcare, and where do they stand? So I put this 4 quadrants together, which is pretty cool. So we see the average life expectancy is 69, and we see the average healthcare expense is 6.4. So when we look at like the top one who spends the most, the country that spends the most on healthcare is the United States. So the health expense percent of their total GDP, and we see it's a pretty big number. So the reason behind that actually is, even though the United States spends the most on healthcare, we actually are one of the most sickest nations, and the reason being is the health and the dietary choices here in America. And that's just from research I've been reading and explaining that. So we actually have the life expectancy is 76, and we spend the most money, versus we look at a country like Singapore, who's almost one of the highest. I think Iceland is the highest. Yeah, Iceland's the highest. But you look at a country like Singapore that's one of the highest living and spends one of the least amount in healthcare. And the reason being is because they're a country who's very rich in fish and more plant-based. They're not 100% plant-based, but they go more to plant-based and more fish. So just that's the whole reason being as to why that. I mean, there's probably more factors, but just from doing some research on that, I'm able to give some context as to why. And then if the user wants to go in and see some detailed analysis, they can scroll through. So just to essentially recap, right? So we go through, the visualization is very easy to follow, very fluid. Speaking to the data, I'm presenting it, to my audience, speaking in a very compelling way. And lastly, providing some context as to why. Why is the data the way it is? And you as the analyst, or me as the analyst, would know that data inside and out, and you'd be able to speak to that very concretely, right? Obviously, I'm not a subject matter expert, but I'm able to do my research and kind of give you the gist of it. So overall, that is the formula, visualization plus narrative plus context. And I hope this was very informative and was very helpful for you guys. And if you do, please like, subscribe. Let me know what kind of other videos you want me to do. I was thinking about, as I mentioned, doing dashboard design. I was thinking about also showing maybe some cool visuals you can do within Tableau, maybe some Tableau tips and tricks. Whatever you guys think, feel free to comment below. Thank you for your time.